the girls of hip hop, Missy Elliott. Well,
So
Little
I
Kim, I don't
too
know.
am the beneficiary of affirmative action, but it does not mean that I was not. Oh, here you go again. I thought we left that potato salad back in the last
For
episode.
Memorial. I mean, really?
What you say? What you talking about, Willis?
Okay.
This is the All Rev'd Up Podcast, Season 7, Episode 6. I'm Reverend Emmett Price.
And I'm Reverend Irene Monroe.
Before we jump into our conversation on hip hop's latest beef, let us thank each of our listeners and viewers. This 7th season is the direct result of your support, encouragement, and comments. Thank you for listening to us on the various podcast apps and for watching the actual live recording of the podcast on our YouTube channel. We are grateful for your support, your encouragement, your feedback, your reviews, and your comments. Thank you so much for sharing this podcast with others.
And as always, I give a shout out of a tsunami of thanks. And I would be remiss, Emmett and I would be remiss not to give a tsunami of thanks to our creative and genius producers, Kyla Wright and Cavante Smalls.
That's right. They are both amazing. Now, Irene, I am watching this story about President Joe Biden going to Morehouse to give the commencement speech. What in the world is going on?
Well, one of the things is I think it's politically wise because he needs to get young votes. And the way things are turning out in terms of what's happening on campus, I don't think he's going to get a bumper crop of them.
No, I mean, these students have not publicly protested much, but they are starting to publicly protest the president coming there. And so whatever, idea he has about, converting or, catechizing Morehouse men into voters, I mean, this actually may end up being hip hop's greatest beef.
There you go. Absolutely here. And and let's make it very clear. These are very responsible young men that, when you talk about Morehouse, you're talking about its academic jewel here. They are voters. They would take their civic duty quite seriously. But the big question is this. Now, will they come out for Joe Biden?
Well, let's go to Drake and Kendrick Lamar. On March 26, 2024, Kendrick Lamar dropped a line on Future's Like That track, refuting claims made by J. Cole that the big three of hip hop were J. Cole, Drake, and Kendrick Lamar. The response initiated a few rebuttals. First by J. Cole, for which Cole actually apologized and removed from all streaming platforms. The second from Drake. Drake's push ups and tailor made freestyle led to Kendrick Lamar responding with Euphoria and 616 in LA. Drake then responded with Family Matters, followed by Kendrick Lamar's Meet the Grams and Not Like Us. Then Drake responded with The Heart, Part 6. Now, Irene, I need to share with our listeners that you wanted to talk about this feud or beef. As a matter of fact, let me also share that I will not comment on the insinuations of domestic violence, sex trafficking, sexual predatory behavior, secret children, or pedophilia. So, with that, Irene, why did you want to talk about this beef so bad?
Well, it raised a couple of questions for me. Number one, is this a kind of Tupac and Biggie kind of fuel, East Coast, West Coast? Although Drake is in Canada, but that is still the East Coast. My interest was the media interest in it. I mean, there were stories. So let me say this: I would expect it in certain black publications and even black Twitter that is now known as X. But when you have it on MSNBC, the New York Times, the Post, then you say, what's going on? Who's benefited from this? Is it feeding the feud even more? Um, and do we as an audience in some way engage in a kind of voyeurism, seeing this go back and forth, this volume go back and forth? So I was just interesting to explore. Let's explore what's behind all of this, and I feel like the story is far bigger than just Kendrick Lamar and Drake. I think there are a lot of more players in industries and networks that are more interested in it than maybe the two guys going back and forth with it. But I
I
need to
mean,
say this. I want to just say this though. I am amazed by their facility of language, the speed at which they were dropping these tracks here. They are two titans. They're masterful at the craft in many ways. And so I think that it's something to just look at them, the artists, not the ad hominem attacks that were going back and forth, but the artists at which they could just with a certain kind of ease and anger, of course, go back and forth. I'm amazed by these guys. I really am.
the beef or the feud in hip hop is, part of, the repertoire. I mean, it goes back to the Bridge Wars, as we called them back in 1985, when KRS-One and Marley Marl were talking about where did hip hop start. Marley Marl talked about the bridge. KRS-One came up with South Bronx. And then, of course, that West Coast rival between Easy E and Dr. Dre, and
Yeah,
when NWA broke up, and then, of course, on the East Coast, you had Nas and Jay Z were in the big time
Jay-Z, that's
feud.
right.
And then, of course, you talked about and you alluded to the East Coast, West Coast with Tupac and Notorious B.I.G. Unfortunately, both of them are deceased due to violence as a result of that quote unquote beef. But when you think about Drake, and I'm going to point this at Drake for a second. Drake was in the beef with Chris Brown. Drake was in the beef with Common. Drake was in the beef with Diddy. Drake was in the beef with Meek Mill. Drake was in the beef with Joe Budden. Drake was in the beef with Tory Lanez. Drake was in the beef with Pusha T, Cash Money Records, Birdman, and Lil Wayne. Drake was in the beef with Kanye West.
Yeah.
Drake was in the beef with The Weeknd. Drake was in the beef with Rick Ross. Drake was in the beef with ASAP Rocky. Drake was in the beef with Future, and now Drake's in the beef with Kendrick Lamar. I mean, come on. There's really no story here other than the fact that this guy wants to beef with everybody so he can get notoriety, so that he can be in your mouth, you talking about him, right? Because Kendrick Lamar don't need that.
No, he
But
doesn't.
here's the thing. Drake is well known. You call him a titan. You call him one of the greats, and perhaps he is. But this dude fights with everybody.
Yeah,
Like,
Drake
at
does,
what
but
point does the guy who gets in all the fights get all the pub?
yeah, well, I think there are a couple of things. You're absolutely right about Kendrick Lamar. I mean, he's an American rapper and songwriter who is regarded as one of the greatest rappers of all times. And he's also one of the only musicians outside of really classical and jazz music to be awarded a Pulitzer Prize here. So, I mean, just by virtue of that, Drake is stepping into the ring with a very much heavyweight. I think, Drake is a very interesting guy because a lot of people call him a cultural vulture in many ways. This is a guy that sort of have replicated the sounds and styles of a number of hip hop artists, and they call him out. But the interesting thing is that I'd like to tease out more is that he has a kind of uber popularity. He's kind of mainstream. He's certainly, and I do kind of feel like this, because Drake is in this feud, we're getting this sort of national attention here. Were it any other artist, coupling up and arguing, I think it would just stay within the confines of Black Twitter and Black papers. But I think it's worth looking at because it started like in March and it just continued to go on, and it stopped. I think because Drake stopped it. He just decided he ran out of either lyrics, out of steam, or just realized that his arms are just a little too short to be boxing with Kendrick Lamar.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying is right on the money, but at what point do we stop feuding or fueling, excuse me, the feud, right? So if we know that that's Drake's MO, if we know that Drake is an antagonist, he's one who's trying to grow a following based on these beefs, like why do we get sucked into it? I mean,
Yeah,
that's why
but
I'm
I
not even
think
really
that
interested
but
in
I
it because
think that
there's
our
no way in the world that Drake can ever match up with Kendrick Lamar.
yeah, I
By
know
the
that,
way,
but
you called him an American rapper. The brothers from
Canada.
California. No, I'm talking about Kendrick
Oh,
Lamar.
Kendrick.
Brother from
Okay.
brother from he from the West Side. He
Yeah.
from deep in that space,
Yeah.
right?
But see, I think there are a couple of things that I think to not have our voice and our critique and our eyes looking at this, then in many ways, then we collude with the dominant culture rendering of it, or even to not give voice to it. I think it's important because they are titans that if we do not write about it, give commentary about it, get opine about it, then we're left to MSNBC, the New York Times, and many of the other mainline publications that really don't understand the multi-layered understanding of what someone like Kendrick Lamar is doing or in his work, and what Drake is appropriating. Because again, dominant society likes to, and I need to say, white society likes to pick out heroes. Uh, and I think that I don't think I want to give them the right to pick our hip hop
Well,
giants.
who cares? I do not read the New York
Well, the
Times to
record,
find out who I'm supposed to be listening to. I do not read
yeah,
the
but it's
Washington Post to see who the
yeah,
hip
but
hop titan of the day is,
yeah, but I
right?
think so. Let me give you a classic example, and I'm going to use a literary one with Toni Morrison. When Toni Morrison wrote Beloved, and Toni Morrison, as you know, intentionally writes normalizing blackness. She doesn't care if white people never read her stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But the point about it is that when it came time for the Pulitzer Prize in Literature, she wasn't nominated. And what I appreciate is people like June Jordan, Alice Walker, and other literary giants did care about it and talked about it, and it did hit the New York Times as well as the Amsterdam News and other papers. But it's because of stuff that people, the dominant culture, sort of give critique to, that they don't understand what a person is doing. It wasn't until a bevy of well-known Black writers really brought Toni Morrison's work to the attention of the American public, to the point that it's like, oh, I think I don't want to take sides, but I think you can't really compare a Kendrick Lamar to a Drake. But the point about it is, I don't want them to be collapsed as one. That there's no variation. There's a significant difference in their work, and particularly, I need to say, in Kendrick Lamar's genius and what he's doing.
But he'd already won a Pulitzer. Like,
Yes, I
there's nothing to
understand.
prove. So I mean,
I
in
disagree.
2018,
I just
he already won it.
I still disagree here, because for a number of reasons. Because even though he has won the Pulitzer, eyes are more seem to be more white eyes seem to be more on Drake. And
But
this is
who
not using,
cares?
but wait, this is not using the white gaze, but this is in many ways making sure that people understand the significance of these two artists, and what differentiate them from one another, and to understand more about why such a fight like this, Emmett, is important to opine about, to talk
Yeah,
about.
I need a break. I just need a break
I'm gonna give it
because
to you too,
I
because you should have it. Okay,
because
okay.
I'm not following the logic
that
here. The
that's all
brother
right.
won a Pulitzer Prize in 2018.
You
This
just
is
don't drop the
2024.
gauntlet
What
there.
he
You
got to
don't.
prove to
You,
anybody?
it's
We
not
taking a
about
break. We taking
proving.
a break. I'm cutting you off.
I'm mad at you.
Listeners, y'all want to work? Y'all want to know when I'm ever cut Irene Monroe off? I'm cutting her off right now. We taking a break. This is the All Rev'd Up podcast. We'll be right back.
I just think that the world needs to focus on what's going on, because those things are just distractions.
This is Y'all Rev'd Up Podcast. We're back. That was Stevie Wonder at LAX Airport, interviewed by TMZ on May 10th, 2024, suggesting, Irene, that this entire feud or this beef is an absolute distraction from the various important other things that we need to be focusing our attention on to. So, what do you say about that, Irene, from what
Okay.
Stevie Wonder said to you, by the
Okay.
way?
To me, okay, absolutely here and stuff. Well, number one is we do see the generational kind of response to this sparring here. Stevie has always been an ambassador of peace. His music has always exuded that. We absolutely understand that, and I understand that this sparring between Drake and and Kendrick Lamar is not the kind of sparring that took place. Now I'm really dating myself, Emmett,
Come on.
between the Temptations and the
Come,
Four
come,
Tops.
come on.
Okay, now that was a different kind of sparring. But the point is that I always feel that when these things go on in our community, that we should have as much control as well as voice on the issue here. But you're absolutely right here. There's a lot going on, but it's still not to negate that this is all to me that this is happening
Mhm.
and that this needs to be recorded and this needs to be since we have reached the 50th mark of hip hop. We need to have those stories that when you're sitting around reading a book, I won't be here, but when you're sitting around reading a book and our producers like, oh yeah, that's right, that's in the annals too.
Well, I think the other way that you pronounce annals is what we were headed towards. Because again, with Drake, this is just it's dung, right? It's poo poo. It's it's not important.
Yes, it is.
No,
Emmett, how
no,
could you?
no,
Drake isn't
no.
important.
It's
Listen,
not
and I'm not
important.
talking about how much money he makes, and I'm not talking about
I'm
his
not talking
his
about that
rating on the
either.
Billboard. I'm talking about that he fits in this important genre of hip hop. He is an important. See, listen. Now, if it was me rapping and dissing one of them, it wouldn't make history. Okay, but the fact that he has this kind of stature, both of them, I think this is quite important.
Well, I mean, the things that they're saying about each other are absolutely insignificant to the big picture of the culture. That does nothing to uplift the
But
culture. It has nothing to do with anything
but
with
it
these
doesn't
ad
it
hominem attacks that they're going
yeah,
on.
well there are two things uh, about that too and stuff. They might be disclosing some stuff, but I don't want to know that the grotty stuff about it. But it is, as I said in the opening, to look at their facility of language, the speed at which they were able to drop this, that the art form, that even in the midst of this fighting, it's looking at the art form is illuminated. It just really is, and it brings people together to talk about this. I think this is an important issue.
I'm
Okay, and I'm
I,
just glad that it will not, because now there's so much said about it, even including us, even though you reluctantly want to talk about it, that this is something that we talked about.
I'm with D1. D1 is a rapper out of New Orleans who's a phenomenal human being, phenomenal, humane uh, spokesperson for eradicating the violence out of hip hop and returning to an expressive culture that uplifts, that encourages. When we go back to the late '70s, whether you're talking about Queens, whether you're talking about South Bronx, whether you're talking about, the boroughs of New York City, hip
Mm-hmm.
hop was used to create a self determination that eventually developed an economic system. But before it was about economics, it was about social mobility. It was about,
Mm-hmm.
creating not only a spirit or a esprit de corps, but creating a sense of empowerment for people who are, and you were there. I mean, so
Mm-hmm.
you
That's
get
right.
this. So
That's
what
right.
we're talking about now and what these jokers are slinging around each other, that has nothing to do with uplift. It has nothing to do with encouragement. It has nothing to do with inspiration. It has nothing to
But you
do
you
with
assume that
empowering.
okay, but you're assuming that one that I'm advocating the violence. Um, I'm saying that I feel that the event itself is important. No, we don't like what they're saying, but I do feel like I would hate again, and you do know I'm a writer. I would hate to like read 10 years back, I mean, ahead and say, well, no, that's not how I read how this moment. this moment, played out. I just think it's important because, again, I mean, I'm repeating myself, but I think it's important. I celebrate hip hop, even though I'm not of the hip hop era, but I think it was important in the same way that I think about Tupac and Biggie. And yes, I'm not eradicating the violent component of it. I'm not negating the vulgar language in it any more than the misogyny and all the other stuff that we find in some of the music itself. I'm not eradicating it, but the moment is important.
Is it only important because MSNBC and Washington Post and New York
No, see
Times and
that's denigrating.
as you
That's
call it Twitter, X,
Twitter.
is it because those entities, caught wind of it and leveraged it to exclaim that they understood about culture, and that you have these pundits who are having essentially slow
No,
media day and slow news days, and all of a
no,
sudden
no. But you know
opining
what, Emmett? That's
on
not fair. You know
indigenous
why
in
that's
their
not. You know
culture.
why that's not fair? Fair because when I think about the Stonewall riot, which I was in, I think about again here um, how when media got it, it bleached out the black
Mhm.
and brown LGBTQ people. But it's the oral history of like me and others who give validity and texture and context to the moment. It was an ugly moment. See, and people would look at that moment and say this. They're nothing but a bunch of they would use the F word,
Mhm. Mhm.
down there. Why does anybody even care about that?
Mhm.
They're God's abomination, da 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 da. So that same kind of, disregard and where we are in culture about something doesn't mean it still doesn't merit being talked about, written about, and part of the archive of our history. And Black voices need to be in the discourse. And I feel it in that way because I remember the Stonewall riot. People would say, "Who care about those people down there? Who cares? So what?" And
So
that's
I
not and they would use the same argument that clearly some gay people, black gay people, that is clearly not about uplift.
I'm going to take my cue from J. Cole, because in many ways J. Cole was really the one who started this beef. And when he got called out initially, what did he do? He apologized and he removed his diss tracks from all streaming platforms. He basically said, "You know what? I was wrong. I should not have escalated this situation, and I'm going to retract everything that I said." I'm taking my cue from him, because even him, the one who actually was the catalyst for this, said, "You know what? We're not going to let this thing blow up to something that it should not blow up to."
But it
So
did.
I'm going with
But it
him.
did. Yes, I'm going with him too, and I'm going to write it down. Okay? I'm going to give it texture and I'm going to talk about it. How about that?
Well, I think we just gonna agree to disagree on this one.
Yes,
And
indeedy.
I'm gonna say what I said off camera. This is gonna end up being our most popular episode of the podcast ever, just because me and you cannot get
Not
to a
agree.
place where we can
Uh-uh.
agree on this, but yet we
Mm-mm.
had the courage to come on here and be live on our YouTube channel and kind of voice it out, and folks see that we even though we feuding, we not really beefing, because I'm not going to attack you with no ad hominem on here, and
That's
I'm not
right.
going to show my verbal dexterity and articulate some prose that will deface myself by talking about you. We're not going to do that on here. We're not going to
Mm-mm-mm.
exemplify that on here.
We're not those kind of people.
No,
That's
we're
number
not.
one.
No,
So
we're
I'm
not.
not even worried about that here and stuff. But the point is that the art form is important. Hip hop is important, and not to and to just because we find it distasteful and not important to not write about it, to not talk about it, does a disservice. And again, that's what they thought about the Stonewall riot, and
I hear you.
that's why it is subsumed by a white narrative, white voice, and contextualization to this point that, as I said, we are bleached out of the narrative. I refuse to let it happen, no matter how disgusting or disgraceful we may think something is. But it's big enough to talk about.
Well, beloved, you have heard it here.
Okay.
Reverend Irene Monroe has put her foot down. Matter of fact, she put both foot down, and you heard it here.
I love you.
Go on to give us your final word here.
All right. Hip hop has celebrated its 50th anniversary. We join in celebrating the birth of this revolutionary movement in music, and we honor the artists who contribute to the culture, technology, and industry of hip hop, the triumphs of hip hop culture, and the artists that are known across the world for their excellence. We give them praise for this. They are the powerful voices in social politics, highlighting the pleasures and rage of being Black or brown or oppressed anywhere in the world. Hip hop culture extends beyond music. The popularity of secular but religiously inclined rappers like Kendrick Lamar and Chance the Rapper have brought a new attention to theological concepts of hip hop, as Kirk Franklin has brought attention to the gospel music of hip hop. It's intriguing to see how artists have combined the coexistence of the sacred and the profane to describe life's complexities and existential contradictions. Hip hop music continues to expand and innovate, birthing a wide range of subgenres such as trap, grime, chill hop, Latin hip hop, and conscious hip hop. Hip hop culture centralizes the interrogation of power, asking who has it and who doesn't and why. Hip hop is a revolutionary movement against white supremacy and systemic racism. It is speaking truth to power. It is of the people and for the people against the machinations of not only white supremacy, but the machinery of human degradation. It is the voice of the rebel speaking of and to the revolution of its time. Hip hop fits everywhere. Its use is open to everyone because it is a means of seeing, celebrating, experiencing, understanding, confronting, and commenting on life and the world. Ashe.
Ashe.
And amen.
Amen. You slick with that one. I love it. I love it. All Rev'd Up is brought to you by us, the Revs. Our amazing producers are Kyla Wright and Cavante Smalls.
Music for this episode is from Reverend Price's son and musical prodigy, Emmett G. Price IV. All Rev'd Up is distributed by GBH.
Additional thanks to Bob Kemp, Elizabeth O'Brien, May He, Devin Robbins, Meredith Neerman, and Zach Waldman.
If you like what you hear, let us know. Give us a review on Apple Podcasts and follow us at All Rev'd Up Pod on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube.
Feel free to send us a note, a question, or a comment to allrevduppod@gmail.com. We'll be back